yes, this could have been 20 short videos, but we already miss F1, so let's settle in for a long, fast-paced look at F1 in 2018. A year in which
Pirelli sang a rainbow. Getting a bit carried away with themselves, Pirelli threw even more rubber compounds and colours at the drivers. So many in fact that who could remember them all? There was the soft, of course, then the super soft, then the ultra soft 64. No, hang on, that might be something else.
See, it's for exactly this reason we're going back to 3 names and 3 colours next year. Even though all the actual compound softnesses are going to be much more varied behind the scenes and changing all the time. Yeah, that's much less complicated. What else happened? Yes,
Grid girls were banned. Banned from the sport. Men everywhere were outraged. Who would hold the drivers' numbers now? Oh no, wait. But still, getting rid of grid girls would mean a massive reduction in visible women at Grand Prix. Everyone was going to have to work extra hard to get more women into the sport and... Okay, we're just farming them off to a segregated series, are we? Okay, I see.
Also, Alonso retired. He was just tired of running around at the back in a series where only a handful of cars have a chance of winning. So, he's moving to running around at the front in a series where only a handful of cars have a chance of winning.
Force India got disqualified from the championship. We were forced to spend the back half of the season haunted by the ghost of Force India past, who still managed to mop up more points than almost half the paddock.
Better than the ghost of Williams present, who would genuinely still be last in the standings even if you disqualified Force India from basically every race.
It's fair to say that anticipation was high going into 2018. Having shown themselves fully capable of taking on Mercedes in 2017, Vettel was confident of putting on an even stronger challenge this season. For the audience, this meant a King Kong vs Godzilla-like duel between 2 4-times world champions going for a 5th, something never before seen in the sport. We were expecting a thrilling back and forth that would keep us guessing all season long.
And did that happen? Well, let's just say I hope you like the German national anthem. Further down the grid, Mclaren had finally given up those accursed Honda power units.
As Mclaren had made very clear, these engines were the only thing holding them back. Now strapping on the proven race-winning Renault engines to what they had described as the best chassis in the grid, they would surely be rocketing back to the front of the field. And we had some exciting rookies joining the field. The supersonic, francophonic, embryonic Pierre Gasly and Charles Leclerc. It would be very interesting to see how they develop over the next couple of years at their respective junior teams, Toro Rosso and Sauber.
We were all hoping they would eventually be able to move up to a bigger team and really start to make an impact on their careers. Fingers crossed, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
And there was a lot of chat over whether Kimi Raikkonen would retire at the end of the year.
The oldest racer on the grid, Raikkonen seemed like his best years were behind him and perhaps his motivations had shifted. He would keep us guessing for most of the year, though we did have the winter to get through first.
Winter is a long, cold time for Formula One fans. The wait for new cars to be launched and for testing to begin is practically hibernatory.
But the F1 world never completely gets shut down.
We had Kimi Raikkonen, for example, joining Instagram and becoming a social superstar with such hits as
I'm on fire. This time, I don't know what I'm doing. And not sure if Finland or Spain. Kimi's Instagram would grow to be one of the places to be over the year, and with his biography coming out later in the year, fans were delighted to get to see the Iceman at room temperature.
Meanwhile, over on Lewis's Instagram.
So the reigning world champion got into a little bit of trouble for deciding, for some reason, to broadcast his discomfort with his young nephew wearing a dress. It was an ill-advised move, and the public discussion around what seemed to be, at best, to be a bit mean and at worst to be ignorantly wading into gender politics threw Lewis so much that he quickly deleted the entire contents of his Instagram and rethought a few things. He would later appear on the front cover of GQ in a kilt for related reasons, apparently.
Perhaps Lewis Hamilton had been indulging a bit in the Christmas cheer through the festive period, as earlier in the month he actually declared Fernando Alonso to be a potential world title contender with McLaren Renault. I won't get ahead of myself here with spoilers, but Lewis might have been a bit off the mark with this one. I mean, we all wanted it to be true. We were all there with you, Lewis, but...
The off-season also saw Formula 1 veteran Robert Kubica fighting for a race seat at Williams.
The Pole hadn't taken part in F1 since a horrific rallying accident injured his arm in 2011. But recent single-seater tests had shown he was as talented as ever and ready to compete again.
Remember now, this is the same driver that Lewis Hamilton feared above all others.
Ultimately, though, Williams chose Sirotkin over Kubica for the race seat. Claire Williams furiously defended her decision, saying Sergei was an exciting prospect and much more than a pay driver. We'd have to wait as the year unfolded to see how that worked out, but I'm sure with talk like that, Sergei will be the star of the midfield.
Force India also started making a lot of noise about changing its name. Force 1 was bandied about quite a lot despite the potentially confusing abbreviation, but ultimately the Force India name stuck for another season, and that would almost certainly be the last we'd hear about any changes within Force India.
Really though, this long winter was building up to what a lot of Formula 1's audience was dreading. In classic Formula 1 style, the controversy had kicked off before the season had even got started.
The FIA had mandated the use of its new Halo, a head protection device so strongly engineered it could withstand debris, tyres, whole cars and even a double-decker bus being thrown at it. In a sport weirdly designed to have the driver's head poking out of their protective monocoque, the Halo was surely an absolute godsend. Unfortunately, the aesthetic of the Halo did not fit well with the car at all. Instead of blending seamlessly with the well-hewn aerodynamic lines and curves of a 21st century racing machine, it looked more like your mate Gary had bolted on a bunch of scaffolding and called it a day. Less of a sore thumb and more of a sore thumb sewn onto your forehead. Resistance came hard, not just from fans, but from drivers and their teams too. Mercedes boss Toto Wolff said he wanted to take a chainsaw to it.
Yeah, and good luck, Toto. Weren't you listening to how strong it was? Good way to ruin a perfectly good chainsaw, Toto.
Gasly managed to rip his suit on the thing while hopping out of the cockpit, and Kevin Magnussen decried its ugliness, saying, "If it looks shit, it is shit." This is of course where I'd linger silently on an image of Kevin Magnussen in a moment of humorous ironic editing, but it doesn't help that he's such a handsome brute. Yeah, you win this round, Kevin. The expected title challengers were more diplomatic. Hamilton curbed his initial distaste after learning just how powerful the device was, and Vettel only spoke favourably of the Halo, repeating the need for the sport to protect its drivers. The FIA, of course, knew that the moment a car got launched into the face of another driver after they hadn't obligated the Halo, they would be sued into 2047, when ironically all the drivers had been replaced by replicants who really didn't care if their heads came off. As the season went on, the Halo found itself tested a few times by both Sauber drivers and Formula 2's Tadasuke Makino. Now, while it's not definitive that the Halo was all that came between those drivers and serious injury, they all came away glad that it was there, and opinions in the paddock begrudgingly began to shift towards its favour. As it happens, with all the talk of the Halo ruining the sport and fans lamenting how the sport had lost its way, it pretty much disappeared into the background after a couple of races. Particularly once the onboard cameras that were placed directly behind the Halo were removed, at least. FOM even took advantage of the Halo, implementing some clever T-Cam augmented reality graphics to complement the shape of the structure, just another step along its quest to turn the sport into a giant video game. In the UK, this will be the last year of regular live free-to-air TV coverage, with Sky having exclusively hoovered up all the live races bar Silverstone for the next 6 years. This meant we'd be seeing a lot less of the excellent Channel 4 team, who had expertly balanced the line between affable and professional, expertise and character. Meanwhile, over at Sky, they tended to go in a little harder with the wacky sideshows and spin-off programmes, to the extent that more than once they aired their novelty programming instead of the increasingly popular live Formula 2 races. It was a little worrying. One thing we weren't short of though was Nico Rosberg, who very much needed us to remember he was still about, despite retiring from racing voluntarily pretty early on in his career. He was now clearly building up his new enterprise as a media pundit and presenter, first by appearing on F1 broadcasts as an expert and guest presenter, and then by spinning out his vlogging series into a full-blown podcast, Beyond Victory. The pilot episode of the show was a curious affair, and pretty impressively he managed to bag a slightly bewildered Bernie Ecclestone as his first interviewee.
This was still very much the Nico Rosberg show though, and rang much more like Nico Rosberg's vlog, with guests, which is fine, and very YouTube.
The most interesting thing I found watching the chat with Bernie was that it lacked any wide establishing shots that showed both of them in the same room at the same time. Instead, it chose to cut back and forth between close-ups that made it look like Tom Tucker's interview with Dustin Hoffman in Family Guy.
I gotta say, you look great.
Are you trying to seduce me, Mr. Tucker?
I am not trying to seduce you, Dustin Hoffman. You really look great.
Uh-oh. 12 minutes to Wapner.
Yes, I understand your hectic schedule. Well, Dustin, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us here in the studio. If there's anything I can ever do for you...
Bring me Peter Pan!
Nico's blending of new and old media should of course be applauded in the backwards and somewhat slow-reacting world of F1, so it'll be interesting to see how he can use his network and his platform to expand on this format.
Honestly though, the most impressive part of this whole venture is that he got Eccleston to talk coherently and without nonsense and distraction for more than 45 seconds, though he did talk positively about dictatorships, and Nico, of his own free will, suggested the popular consensus is that Bernie is very generous, kind and selfless, comparable even to Nelson Mandela?
Nelson Mandela, you also met him. His ability for compassion is his strongest asset. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's giving without expecting anything in return.
Exactly.
Which is what a lot of people say about you as well. A lot of people give you those attributes as well, that you love helping.
Personally, I'm looking forward to Fernando Alonso's vlog, with special guest, Ron Dennis. At the season opener in Australia, it looked very much like Mercedes had the upper hand performance-wise. Plus ça change and all that.
But to the relief of many, the separation in performance between the Mercedes, Ferrari and Renault engines looked to have closed up significantly over the winter.
In fact, if you looked across the board, it seemed like Ferrari might well be the engine to have in 2018, with Haas in particular placing themselves very nicely on the grid.
As a package though, Mercedes were certainly ahead. Hamilton grabbed pole with ease and Raikkonen got himself gridded up ahead of Vettel. The titanic battle between the 4-time world champions would have to deal with race-by-race interlopers.
Everything I've said so far though, come race day, none of it mattered. In fact, those going out to place some easy bets might have found themselves very light of pocket come Sunday afternoon.
See Raikkonen outracing Vettel through Saturday and Sunday accidentally handed the German a huge advantage. Mercedes had Hamilton keeping tabs on Raikkonen, his main rival for the day, so when Kimi pitted, Lewis pitted to cover him off, leaving Vettel, unhappy on his tyres, inheriting the lead. Temporarily, or so he thought. Unfortunately for Mercedes, during the short window while Vettel was leading and yet to pit, the wheels came off Haas's race. Literally. They didn't screw the wheels onto either of their cars properly, and Magnussen's hasty retirement spawned the virtual safety car, giving Vettel enough time to get in and out of the pits without losing track position to Hamilton. From there, he held the lead to the end.
Hamilton had been gazumped, and Vettel took a win when he expected a third, a crucial move in the opening to his championship.
Australia also gave us the first opportunity to see what F1's newish owners, Liberty, had done with the place. Having moved in a while ago and figured out where the plug sockets and light switches are, Liberty Media were now looking to make the place more their own.
Stripping the old wallpaper, slapping on a new lick of paint, you know the thing, open the doors and windows and let out the old man smell.
It's clear the new owners think of F1 as an asset to be monetised, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, as the best way to make something more profitable is to shape it to be as enjoyable as possible. Sean Bratches, the commercial director, described F1 under Bernie as distinctly undermanaged. So what would Liberty do differently? The first thing they introduced to the world was a brand new logo, along with a suite of new typefaces and style guides.
The new logo was fine. As with all modern designs, it erred on the side of plain so it could be packaged and purposed to fit with all their other branding needs. It was everything a new organisation needed to rubber stamp their identity on the place.
Fans turned their noses up at it at first, but as we all know,
F1 fans don't like change. We've seen this with engines, wings, graphics, ITV, Sky, Channel 4, BBC, the tyre war, no tyre war, engines again, Pirelli, Michelin, Bridgestone, qualifying, Greek girls, Greek boys, Pirelli, Halo. And Liberty knows this. And it's probably the fact that F1 fans are notoriously overreactive to change that Liberty felt they could ignore their reactions when they started to bring in some more genuinely bad stuff during the course of the season.
With the new logo comes in yet another package of TV graphics, which is a bit of a shame as the last set of on-screen information was the clearest, most attractive and contemporary design we ever had. Again, Liberty stuff was fine, despite a weird persuasion to putting red text on a black background which reads fine on a big HD television but looks fuzzy and illegible on streams and smaller devices. FOM continued to add features to the TV graphics throughout the year, including a new love of throwing up stats to complement what was happening on screen. Hamilton got pole? Oh, this was his 7th pole in Spain. Hulkenberg came 11th? This is the 24th time he's come 11th. Van Dorn is racing in Sochi? Well, did you know he is Sochi nice guy?
Where the graphics started to cross the line into weird, distracting or even unsavoury was the increased use of augmented reality on the trackside cameras.
In some cases where it actually displayed race information, it seemed to be flashy just for the sake of being flashy. There were barrier-side messages that accompanied radio chats in Singapore that looked more at home in the Mario Kart Electrodome.
In most other cases it was used to display cheesy messages, brand slogans, and the less we say about engineered insanity, the better. And worst of all, advertising. Most notably, for Heineken.
Not satisfied with banners and screens around the track, Heineken actually managed to get their Red Star logo prominently featured on track via real-time CGI. Giant Heineken stars hundreds of meters high towered over the track and grandstands as their cars raced by underneath. They were hideous, poorly rendered, distracting and extraordinarily crass, much like Jacques Villeneuve. Coupled with experiments like in Canada where the actual start lights themselves have been transformed into Heineken stars, and a lot of people were starting to worry about what might come next. A fake Emirates plane flying over the circuit constantly? DHL delivery trucks outpacing the F1 cars on track? Turning the Singapore Flyer into a giant Rolex?
Oh wait, they already did that, and that got them into trouble.
And not content with fiddling with the visual, Liberty also made moves to revolutionise our audio experience too. Most hilariously, they added audible beeping sounds to the accompanying start lights, which made you think of only one thing.
It's lights out and away we go. Excellent start from Sebastian Vettel. Lewis Hamilton covers him and outside goes Max Verstappen. Locking up on the inside, Valtteri Bottas.
In one of the biggest of these audio changes, F1 actually commissioned and implemented an official Formula 1 theme tune.
When the tune was first released, people were sceptical of this Brian Tyler composition for feeling a little bit bland and uninspired. But in context, in the hype of race build-up,
it was a bloody banger!
Liberty are just getting started, and their plans to shake up how we see and experience F1 will continue to build over the next few years.
Now, can we just expect a bunch of audiovisual enhancements, or are Liberty going to do what they promised and focus F1 back on the fans? Time, and I suspect a lot of patience, will tell. But they're going to have to act decisively as the F1 audience is starting to demonstrably erode as the TV moves away from free-to-air.
Leaving Australia, it was clear that unusual serendipitous circumstances had clipped Mercedes' wings for a brief moment, and leaving them needing to reassert their advantage.
But it turned out the race in Melbourne was not going to be the only joker in the pack. In fact, the next 3 races continued to throw bananas on the track and blew shell the mightiest races.
The next race in Bahrain saw Ferrari with a significant upper hand, but Mercedes forced Ferrari into a one-stop after they'd chosen the softer compounded tyres. Vettel still took home the win, but Bottas made him work for it all the way to the line. A puncture kept Lewis Hamilton out of the action, and worse, a botched pit stop ending in a broken leg for a Ferrari mechanic sidelined Raikkonen.
These opening flyaways really did seem to be about how badly teams could throw away their potential. Year on year we've seen this kind of sleepy waking from hibernation act, where teams just seem to make mistake after mistake after mistake.
This was good news for any smaller teams that could keep it together, of course. After the first two races, Mclaren were third in the championship, Sauber already had points on the board, and Gasly in the Toro Rosso Honda had managed a fourth place.
Ooh, I wonder if that'll bode well for him at Red Bull.
In China, Vettel and Ferrari were once again out-strategized by Bottas's team at Mercedes. This time, the Finn managed to pull off a brilliant undercut and take the lead. He looked set for an easy victory until a late safety car allowed Red Bull to gamble everything on the power of a fresh set of softs. It worked a treat, with the duo carving their way through a defenceless rabble of drivers who were playing the game far too conservatively. Ricciardo stole the win while Verstappen made a hashtag of himself, tripping unnecessarily over Sebastian Vettel. 3 races down, no wins for Mercedes.
You know, if you were a chicken farmer and really in the business of counting your eggs before they hatched, then, to borrow a phrase from Lee Mackenzie, Baku was about to bitterly disappoint you.
There was the now classic argy-bargy Azerbaijani spate of drivers bonking each other and their bodywork across the racetrack. But the two Red Bulls taking each other out, Sebastian Vettel losing control of his car at a safety car restart to throw away an easy victory, and momentary leader Valtteri Bottas ripping a puncher, ended up giving the victory to an astonished Hamilton.
Miraculously, Lewis Hamilton had now taken charge in the Drivers' Championship, but there was still so much of the season left to go.
The first 4 races of the season had been pretty wild then, with chaos, strategy and surprise feeding into unexpected results and battles for wins coming right down to the final laps.
And then we got to Spain. It was the first total dud of the year. It was traffic from end to end. And if people weren't concerned by the lack of action in Spain, well, Monaco would really set off the warning lights.
On the streets of Monte Carlo with 50 laps to go, Daniel Ricciardo, leading the race, suffered an MGU-K failure. Complete, irreparable failure. 160 brake horsepower gone for the rest of the race. Poof.
Here's the thing though, it didn't cost him a single position. Ricciardo, with a huge proportion of his engine power out of action, went pretty much unchallenged for the entire race. He was the tractor in a country lane.
I mean, Monaco, with its narrow streets and claustrophobic barriers, is always a difficult place to overtake. Sure, but this was worrying. Canada, usually a race fans look forward to for its potential for close racing, accidents, surprise winners, and generally being a hotspot for fun action, followed the same pattern.
Little opportunity for overtaking, drivers having to back off to save engines and tyres, and strategies veering towards the conservative.
And despite the excitement of Formula 1 returning to its home nation on brand new track to the sport, the French Grand Prix was largely forgettable, save for a first lap tangle between Vettel and Bottas and the track's runoff areas leaving those little ice swirlies behind long after the race had ended.
Honestly, for me, just thinking about the French Grand Prix brings back the eye floaters.
This was not a problem Formula 1 was going to solve by distracting you with its pumping theme tune and flashy new graphics. This was embarrassing.
It is really hard to call your series the creme de la creme of racing if there isn't any actual racing in it.
It didn't help that Pirelli's softening up of the compounds and throwing the extreme Hypersoft tyre into the mix in an attempt to shift races back towards the 2-stop strategies just hadn't worked. Teams were riding out the rubber as long as they possibly could to avoid having to take that extra pit stop, and that meant conservation, conservation, conservation.
This meant no attacking, no racing, no squeezing every last bit of performance out of the rubber. Just like me getting out of bed on a Monday morning, the teams had done the calculations and, you know what, it just wasn't worth the effort.
If a 2-stop strategy was faster on paper, it would still come with the added risk of having to perform more overtakes to keep up the pace that was required to pull it off. And in 2018, overtakes were not something you'd even bet a packet of crisps on falling your way.
So what happens next? Well, in 2019, Formula 1 is bringing in some rushed, but not completely thoughtless, interim measures to tide us over until the real design revolution comes in 2021.
This will be focused around a general aero tidying up that hopes to clear up the air behind the car and allow cars to get closer to each other. Very obvious ideas really, whereas the most recent set of rule changes have moved the cars in exactly the opposite direction, making the aero more complicated and the cars wider in an effort to make the cars look faster, with the very obvious casualty to all this being the annihilation of overtaking and close racing.
Because, why make the cars actually racy when you can just make them look fast? Like, why should I wear a full suit in a studio when I can just fake it? Look, I'm not even wearing trousers. These decisions are all very weird, because can you even tell just by looking if a car is 4 seconds faster than it was last year? Is that a thing that gives you goosebumps? I'll tell you what's much more conspicuous. For now, we just had to wait it out and hope that bizarre circumstances conspire to create exciting races, as we saw in Silverstone. Though the on-track action was varied, but often uninspired and muzzled by the current spec in F1, the actual race for the championship was the spiciest it had been in years. Between Australia and Austria, the hands on the trophy had changed 4 times, with a double retirement from the Mercedes in Spielberg once again handing the advantage back to Sebastian Vettel. We were now about to hit the home races of Lewis and Sebastian with the British and German Grand Prix. The pressure was on to give the home fans exactly what they'd come to see. But in both cases, results fell slightly short of expectation. In Britain, Hamilton took pole position but lost the lead immediately off the line with a poor getaway before getting punted off the track and into last place by Kimi Raikkonen. This left Bottas and Vettel to fight it out for the lead. Hamilton and Raikkonen made their way through the field with much aplomb, with yet another late safety car placing both Ferraris and both Mercedes tantalisingly nose to tail at the front of the pack. The next few laps saw us feeling more tense than a Glastonbury reveller trying to find a Portaloo at 2 in the morning. It was set up beautifully. Bottas was at the head of the race, but once again he was on the most vulnerable strategy, staying out on old tyres to hold position, leaving him unable to fight off the other 3 cars. Vettel took the win ahead of Hamilton, with the Brit having to duck out of the post-race interviews for a few moments to compose himself. He'd lost a sure win in front of what he'd no doubt considered to be the best fans in motor racing. Having wiped the smile from the faces of the British crowd, could Vettel now wipe that smile onto the German fans? That sounded a bit gross, didn't it? Kind of reminds me of that weird Jared Leto tattoo. Anyway, no, he couldn't. A slight bit of drizzle lasting just a few laps was enough to throw off the grip levels at Hockenheim, and an uncharacteristic error from Vettel threw him into the barrier and out of the race lead. Hamilton picked up the pieces and the championship swung back again for the 5th time this year. It was becoming increasingly clear that Ferrari had the strongest all-round package, and in the eyes of many it was their championship to lose. Their biggest problem came in the shape of a Mercedes driver in the form of his life, Valtteri Bottas. If fate had twisted her thread in a slightly different direction, the Scandi man candy could well have fought for this championship. In fact, had Valtteri not seen misfortune after misfortune through the early season, well, that would be enough to keep him in the game. But that's not how luck works, and while all drivers have their fair shake of the dice, Bottas has been dealt a dodgy hand at the slot machine, with the ball always landing on black. In Australia he crashed in qualifying, which, okay, was a bit of a burn of his own making, but after that he seemed to be in the right place at the wrong time. In Bahrain he out-strategised Vettel, forcing the German to nurse softer tyres for way longer than he should have been able to. The win was there for the taking. Bottas was not throwing away his shot. But Vettel, on raggedy tyres, blew us all away. In China he had the win in his pocket, but fate said no to this. When a safety car was deployed late in the race, Bottas chose to run non-stop from the lead, while Ricciardo gambled on a pit stop for fresh tyres, plucking the win out from underneath him. In Azerbaijan, the deck seemed to have shuffled the race in his favour, with safety cars, a huge lock-up from Vettel and a well-timed pit stop, leaving Bottas in the lead of the race with only a handful of laps to go. Finally, he was leading and on the right strategy. Surely that would be enough. But no, a puncture took him out on the very next lap. What comes next? He started on the front row in France and was all set for at least a podium before Vettel clumsily boffed him out at the start. In Austria, his car broke down before he'd even got into his rhythm. In Britain, he once again led the race in the closing stages, but once again was on the weakest set of tyres, so had to watch helpless as not 1, not 2, but 3 rival cars got past and left him with not even a podium for his efforts. In Germany, Bottas was aggressive and overtook Raikkonen to put him in prime position on fresh tyres after Vettel crashed and brought out yet another late safety car. He made a bold attack on his teammate to try and take the lead, but his team told him to take a break. Another attempt at victory, lost. By this point he was over 60 points behind his own teammate. But without a crash here, a safety car there, one less puncture and a slightly more robust car in Austria, Bottas had the potential to have strung together 5 wins and a 38-point lead by Hungary.
The man's middle name isn't Victor for nothing. Now that's just his ceiling, of course, if everything had gone right. I'm not saying it would have happened, but if the stars had aligned and he'd be thrown a few more bones, this could have been a Valtteri good year for Bottas. He could have shown us the best of drives and best of winning.
But Hungary came, signalling the start of the back end of the season, and Hamilton needed a right-hand man, a role Bottas dutifully took for the rest of the season. It looked like for another year at least, the Finn would have to wait for it.
Time will tell if he'll ever be satisfied.
Following Hungary, the teams packed up their swimming cozies and took off on a summer break, leaving us all wondering what on earth to do with our lives now.
Summer break is normally a quiet period where basically nothing happens because the teams are forced to shut down for a couple of weeks so the staff can go home and the kids can remember who mummy and daddy are.
And then Force India collapsed. The team had been in money trouble for years, the financial situation involving many dramatic subplots, including the dissolution of an entire airline and the alleged absconsion of Vijay Mallya from over $1 billion in debt with a dozen Indian banks, using the mind-boggling technique of legging it overseas and hiding.
That's the thing with billionaires, isn't it? They're so smart. That's how they get rich and stay rich. Legging it overseas and hiding. Amazing.
Anyway, it turns out we needn't have worried, because when we all returned, tanned and stressed out from the summer break in Spa-Francorchamps for the Belgian Grand Prix, we were delighted to see a brand new team on the grid. Now oddly, this team looked exactly like Force India. Its name was Force India too. The drivers were Force India drivers, the livery was Force India's livery, but everyone insisted this was a brand new team. Force India was dead. Long live Force India!
Confused? Yeah, so was everyone else.
It had been a tough start to the season for Force India. After 5 years of improved results in a row, including 2 solid 4th places in the last 2 years, the team really hadn't been able to produce the same kind of results in 2018. Word had it that money troubles were holding them back from the continual development needed to keep them holding station as the best of the rest. And their position was valuable to sponsors. Sponsors that kept the money coming in to allow them to hold position. I mean, you see how this all spirals out of control pretty quickly. Anyway, ultimately debts were due, the pressure piled on, and the team was forced into administration. Bizarrely by their own driver, Sergio Perez.
Honestly, if Formula 1 doesn't go up against the Kardashians, Love Island, and the Real Housewives of Who'd You What's It for a Best Reality TV Drama Emmy, I'm going to lose my shit.
Billionaires from across the lands all seem to have their eye on the team. Billionaires love picking up sports teams. It's like panini stickers for the rest of us, except really shiny.
Some of us were half expecting Elon Musk to pop his head over the guardrail and tell us he built a brand new Formula 1 team out of Lego and bits of old submarine, and he'd win every race too if only they let him on track.
But in the end, as we'd all been expecting for a while, driver dad Lawrence Stroll and his team of investors bought up the team, giving it the cash boost it needed to survive, and rocked up in Belgium as if nothing had happened. And due to the complicated tangle of rules, time constraints and diplomacy they had to navigate, to pull this off they had to both end Force India and make a new Force India in one fell swoop. So they were the same team but a new entry. The cars were the same but they now had no points. But they did have the same tally of engines, but also on paper they'd never been seen at a Grand Prix before. They were the guy incognito of racing teams. Except this time everyone was playing along.
The real icing on the cake in all this is that Force India in their first race did so well that if they hadn't had to jump through so many hoops to erase all their points, they'd already be 4th in the championship again. Such is life, I guess.
Force India had been something of a revelation over the past few years, wielding hefty punches
while remaining a privateer team on the edge. A lot of us were waiting for them to finally break through to more regular podium finishes and perhaps the odd win on a lucky day. With Haas looking strong thanks to a tight Ferrari partnership, Mclaren now powered by race-winning Renault engine and the Works Renault team on something of a steady renaissance, it looked like 2018 might be the year that the midfield would close up to the big three at the top.
After all, only 3 teams, Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull, had even won a race since the start of the hybrid era in 2014.
But if anything, 2018 was an exacerbation of the problem. The midfield itself was lighter and fightier than ever, sure. In fact, taking out Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull would result in a hell of an exciting championship, so much so that the TV director often made sure to focus on the regularly more exciting battles happening further down the field.
But the gap between the top 3 and everyone else was enormous.
Far too often, by the halfway point of the race, the fastest contender of the midfield teams was over a minute behind the slowest of the top 3.
It's like in the WEC, where technically the hybrid cars are in the same class as the LMP1 class, but come on, we all have eyes here.
There were even Twitter and Reddit groups dedicated to watching the best of the rest fight, known as Formula 1.5 at first by fans, and then by the media, and even by the drivers themselves. Hülkenberg, Perez, Magnussen, Renault and Haas became firmly invested in being the best of the rest, and claiming the fictitious but fabulously ornate Formula 1.5 trophy. But is this all just a blip, or will the divide continue to grow in an ever-expensive sport where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, where success equals money and money equals success?
Claire Williams-Martini of Williams-Martini Racing called the sport basically broken, saying, "It's naive to think that if you just work hard, you'll be rewarded."
The financial discrepancy compared to Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull is just too big. It's impossible to keep up, and it's sad.
It is sad. Teams in the midfield work just as hard as teams at the top, and all they get is to fight for the scraps left over from the grown-ups table. Let's not forget that last decade the points only went down to 6th place. 6th place! The Constructors' title would look like this.
Zak Brown, head of McLaren, described the whole situation as a ticking time bomb, and that F1 is far from being too big to fail. With a potential budget cap on the horizon, perhaps F1 will slap itself awake from this fever dream before it sinks under its own delusion and grandeur.
We do have to wait until 2021 until anything can happen budget-wise, but then we can always hope that the teams will do what's right for the sport. Hopefully. Ish.
Due to their incredible battles, the midfield had been more focused on than ever, despite falling behind. And during the summer break, it helped give the silly season a whole new energy as the driver market went absolutely bananas.
Change places!
The driver market is normally quite placid from year to year, with a couple of expected promotions, demotions and sidesteps. But this year...
Change places!
It all sort of kicked off at Red Bull, where even though the team had secured a new engine partner in Honda, they couldn't deliver a car though. Daniel was off to Renault in a surprise move that no one in the team even knew about. After years of being locked in a Red Bull contract, Daniel Ricciardo was 3. Now this left a gaping hole in the second seat, though the team were more than keen to take their time in picking a replacement, even though they Verstappen to have the perfect driver waiting in the wings at Toro Rosso. They weren't prepared to be backed into a Christian Horner. And while they didn't want their decision making to appear rashly, they did of course pick Pierre Gasly. Though a certain Spanish world champion had been working day and night to turn his team into a competitive force, it was all for none though, not for lack of trying. It had been a long, sobering experience for everyone at the team, but Fernando had been thinking all of the time he had to leave at this place. Now you'd think McLaren want to bolster down the driver they had left, but like UPS, they decided to plough on without a Van Doren. When looking for new pilots for 2019, McLaren, a proud British team of New Zealand heritage and American ownership, really needed that Lando hope and glory. There are a lot of drivers on the market, but the one thing they couldn't ignore is the raw talent in their young Formula 2 protege. As for their other seat, well, in the words of Jennifer Aniston, here comes the science. With Force India under new management, Lance Stroll decided in a shocking move that the Pink Panthers would be the team for him. He felt the team had really grown a pair, and they would be the ones to take him farther and really put him on a par with the rest of the midfield. There was just something about this team that Pops. And if he was lucky, he'd stay there until he was an old man. This of course put a certain talented popular Frenchman at risk. In fact, the more time went on, the more it seemed the only way to keep the driver carousel moving is to ban Ocon from a drive next year. As a Mercedes protege, no other teams would touch him, even if forced to go toe-to-toe to Toto to totally explain their hesitance, even if Mercedes bends over backwards to try and get him a drive. It wasn't looking good for Esteban Ocon, but the fans were singing their prayers. And yet the madness kept coming.
Change places!
We were left monogassed when Ferrari said Marin hello to Charles Leclerc and said fan to the Finn. This left Sauber to say come here Raikkonen and the rest of us to wonder how far Kimi's career would last. All of this grand switcheroo would happen by mid-September, which still left 9 seats unconfirmed for 2019, with many fans hoping someone somewhere could rustle up a seat for some of their favourite drivers. You'd think there has to be somewhere for everyone to go, even if they form an orderly Kubica. But we could be yet to see where the line will be drawn. Though I think it's clear no one will be taking the mick.
Back on track, Ferrari were keen to turn the advantage back to Sebastian Vettel, having hit the summer break with a 24-point deficit to Hamilton. And boy did they! After a hell of a first corner crash for the midfield, Alonso outdragged Hamilton up the Kemmel Straight to take the lead, and from there he took off and never looked back. It was a dominant win, and to all and sundry, Ferrari looked to have the stronger package. Sure, they were behind in points, but to many it did look like they still had the championship in hand. So they arrived at their home race in Italy with a bit of a swagger in their step. The Tifosi were wild with excitement and Ferrari basked in the Marlboro red glow, locking out the front row to joyous applause. It wasn't Vettel on pole though, it was everyone's favourite chatterbox Kimi Raikkonen, who benefited from his teammate's slipstream to grab an extra tenth or two he needed to win that weird little tyre thing they give to the pole sitters. An aside, Hamilton has like 70 pole positions. Can you imagine if he got one of those little tyre things every single time in his career? He'd have enough to run a little taxi company. And I mean a little taxi company. Anyway, Vettel was not so quietly annoyed at starting behind the number 2 driver at Ferrari, so made plans to take the lead as soon as possible on race day. If Kimi was to play the wingman though, someone must have forgotten to let him know. He defended fairly robustly against Vettel on the opening lap, allowing Hamilton to squeeze into play. Both Hamilton and Vettel ended up fighting over the same bit of track, and the German ended up worse off, spinning back to last place. This was the third first lap kerfuffle between Mercedes and Ferrari this year. Their rivalry was becoming a little bit of a spicy meatball. But for all the furious swearing Italian fans in the stands, at least Kimi was still in the lead. Right? Well, yes, and to be honest, we were all rooting for him to get that elusive win. But where Kimi had shrugged off his wingman role, Valtteri Bottas grabbed it with both hands. Mercedes extended his opening stint by a long way, enough to allow Kimi to pit and then get stuck behind his fellow Finn for so many laps that his medium tyre, expected to last the rest of the race, burned and blistered. And by the end of the race, Kimi had nothing left to fight with against Hamilton, who muscled his way past and took victory. The prancing horse was left with its tail between its legs. Bottas meanwhile recovered well from his dogged wingmanery though, ending up fighting with Verstappen for last place on the podium. Max defended well. Until he didn't. Which brings us to spins in Australia while trying to catch one Haas and escape another, managing to muck up attacking and defending in one go. Runs Hamilton off the road in Bahrain, tripping over the Mercedes front wing and getting a puncture. Probably should have given him a bit more space this time. You'd think Verstappen would have learned from his tangle with Hamilton in Bahrain, but no, he launches into a bit of a hasty move and ends up running wide, losing a place to Ricciardo. I'm sure that won't come back to bite him. Still no lessons learned. Still in China, he creams into Vettel, costing them both quite a lot in a race that he could have won. Oh dear, oh dear. He may be too aggressive at attacking sometimes, but at least he's robust and fair at Oh, whoops, he's taken out his teammate. Threatening to headbutt journalists. Okay, running into the back of someone under the virtual safety car, that's a tricky one to pull off. But Max did it at a stroll in Spain, taking advantage. Max's father says never again criticise Max's aggressive style. And this would mean so much more coming from someone whose own aggressive style hadn't come into question so often, wouldn't it? Stopping for inters on a pretty dry track. That's some points down the drain.
Stop the car, please. What a choke all the time with this honestly.
At least Max is working through his anger issues. Pity from Pasta Maldonado. Oh Max, Monza is a pretty narrow track, but there's still room for the two of you. That's a 5-second penalty right there.
I gave them space. They do a great job in killing racing, honestly.
Okay, so you don't like the penalty. I'm sure that'll be well received. Squeezing on Vettel is a risky move. You got lucky this time, Max. I'm still going to ding you though, because I'm enjoying the power. Have another. Have another.
Can I not just go and care if the engine blows up?
Moving on to Singapore, it still looked like Ferrari had the strongest overall package and the greatest chance of pulling this whole championship challenge together. Sure, Italy had slipped through their buttery fingers, but if practice and history had anything to go by, Vettel had this one in the bag. But no, despite being dominant through free practice and the first two qualifying sessions, and despite Singapore being traditionally Mercedes' Achilles heel, and despite Hamilton putting in a Q3 lap that Vettel himself described as entirely beatable, Vettel did not get pole. He didn't even get to start on the front row. Verstappen of all people had pulled a sensational lap out of his bum bag to claim P2 on the grid. Vettel and Ferrari had melted through bad timing and poor preparation, getting well out of rhythm through their outlaps. The race was no better for them. Vettel was handily beaten by both Hamilton and Verstappen through lack of pace and a strange, vulnerable strategy. Like a teenager and their parents through adolescence, the gap between Ferrari and the top of the table had widened depressingly further. Ferrari might arguably have still had the best package, but they gave themselves a hell of a hill to climb. Oh yes, Ferrari. We all like to think of Ferrari in F1 as what Jeremy Clarkson is to Top Gear. You know, you could carry on the show without him, but not without losing a little bit of its soul and what made the whole thing worth watching. He was kind of the person that held the whole band together. Even if he was a massive arsehole. Such is the view of many in F1 of Ferrari, and the need for the sport to maintain commercial viability has allowed Ferrari to increasingly act out in the old, "what are you going to do, fire me? Good luck, my dad's the CEO" routine. But let's get real here. The idea that Formula 1 is centred around Ferrari is totally whack. The mythos they built around themselves are based almost entirely around the extraordinary godfather character of their founder, Enzo Ferrari, Il Commendatore himself. And just the fact that Ferrari have been around since the beginning. Mercedes, Red Bull, Sauber, McLaren and most of the players all evoke a wide range of emotion, good, bad and ugly. And that all stirs into the big pot that is the soap opera of F1. After all, for all their years in F1, Ferrari have not spent a massive amount of that time at the front, but they've played themselves into getting the most money, having the most say in the rules, and consistently having the most highly valued sponsorship space, even when they just flop around in the midfield. Despite this, Ferrari have threatened to dump the sport on its arse every time they're worried Mummy and Daddy won't give them enough presents.
How many are there?
36. Counted them myself.
36? But last year I had 37!
Yes, well, some of them are quite a bit bigger than last year.
I don't care how big they are!
Some of their most recent quick threats before this year have come in 2017, 2014, 2009, 2008, 2004, well, you get the idea. It's all part of a rehearsed routine that screams, "I'm special." But are they special, or is this just an image they've curated for themselves? In the last couple of years, they started to go dark with the media, restricting interviews, holding fewer press conferences, and generally being incredibly coy with reporters about anything. Another shroud of mystery to this enigmatic team. They've even moved towards personally reframing the story of a race when the results go against them. But rather than add to the mystique of their brand, this aloof behaviour has tended to get right up people's exhaust pipes, with the media in particular getting increasingly and vocally annoyed at Ferrari's lack of engagement, and this attitude tends to get passed on to their audiences. The Scuderia constantly feeds the system that paints them as the indispensable leads, the Downey Juniors, the Streeps, the Beyoncés, by pretending to quit and by cutting off media access to increase their minute-by-minute value. Like a De Beers diamond, it's all a bit of a facade, really.
It's a bit like when Mercedes pretends to pit to trick other people into jumping the gun at the stops. You know, do you want to risk not taking the pit stop? Do you want to risk running Formula 1 without Ferrari? Do you?
The truth is, of course, that Ferrari needs F1 more than F1 needs Ferrari. But don't tell the Tifosi that.
Ferrari famously don't advertise. Instead, their road car sales come from overcompensation issues and the Italian marque's exposure through their motor racing programs. The biggest by far being Formula 1.
And Ferrari wants us to believe that their symbiotic relationship with F1 adds little or no value to their brand, as if they're doing the sport a favour just by turning up every other weekend. They threaten to quit, but to where? No one gives them the gilded platform they have here.
It'd be a bit like the Queen getting in a huff and threatening to sack off the throne to become Mayor of Bromley. I'd be like, sure, you do add a bit of majazzle to the place, but you're costing us millions of pounds. Enjoy Bromley. It's got a big TK Maxx.
The next 3 races really consolidated Ferrari's losses into one manageable lump sum. One thing's for sure though, and that's that Ferrari, for all their pomp and brashedness, had thrown a championship position of strength and assuredness right in the bin.
Yo! Holy schmoly!
Look at Vettel's points relative to Hamilton. Around Hungary, Belgium, we all thought that, despite a points deficit, Vettel had it all in hand to fight all the way. Ferrari looked strong. And then... In fact, Hamilton could have had it all wrapped up in the USA if it wasn't for an unusually weak race from him in which he'd underdriven and Ferrari had outmanoeuvred him with Kimi Räikkönen of all people. Though maybe it serves him right that for getting the Russian Grand Prix handed to him by Bottas via some very unpopular team orders, that this time Hamilton didn't get to celebrate a championship in America. So Vettel, after starting the year so strong, was all set to lose the championship in Mexico. Where did it all go wrong? Let's see if we can figure it out, shall we? The simplest explanation is that Hamilton made fewer mistakes, honestly. The potency of the Ferrari and Mercedes packages fluctuated somewhat over the year, but Hamilton genuinely grabbed the points he was able to at almost every race. Meanwhile, Vettel was throwing away leads from quite early on for no real reason. He got himself into tussles time and time again through impatience and perhaps an overly aggressive belief in how much of the track he was owed. Most of the time, he came off worse. He got that penalty in Austria for blocking in qualifying and another in France for punting Bottas into the Paul Ricard fingerprint. He should have got that pole in Singapore to set up a nice win, but even that slipped through his fingers. It was as messy a year as perhaps his first one on this planet, and not one that seemed worthy, upon reflection, of building towards that 5th World Championship. Now Hamilton got into scrapes and was far from perfect too. He didn't get a win till 4 races in, even that was handed to him by Vettel and Bottas losing it. He was involved in that crash with Räikkönen in Britain, though it's debatable how many points that would have cost him in the end. And he had that win handed to him by Bottas in Russia, a win no one thought he actually deserved. Even saying this out loud, I'm worried I'll get labelled as a Hamilton fanboy, but he really did thread together a stronger, more stable championship fight. And I find myself wondering, where is the Vettel of the early decade? The man who'd find a way to win no matter what. Untouchable on his best days and a force to be reckoned with even on his bad days. Was that raging bull now no more than a prancing horse? Will Vettel get another chance at the championship, or will he find himself floating in the limbs of near success, his goals just out of reach? Will he be forced to watch his rivals collect the gold as younger stars start to take his place? Will he become the next Fernando Alonso? Following over a decade of terrible career decisions, Fernando Alonso decided that instead of making one bad decision at a time, he'd compete in every Premier Motor Racing series simultaneously. See, Alonso, knowing he was among the greatest, most legendary drivers motorsport had ever seen, was stuck with the problem that he couldn't actually prove it due to his lack of actual championships, race wins or pole positions.
And it was looking increasingly like Alonso wouldn't make any headway at McLaren, a team that had tripped over itself so badly it was struggling to find its own arse to kick. Having burned bridges elsewhere by being, as the English say, a complete ball ache to work with, Alonso came up with a new plan.
Instead of building upwards, stacking championship upon championship, win upon win, in an effort to stand taller than anyone in F1, he would build outwards, winning titles and flagship races across all of motorsport. The Indy 500, Daytona, Le Mans, the WEC. Everything was fair game to Alonso, and his celebrity kudos opened doors to pit garages around the world.
It all started with Alonso sacking off the Monaco Grand Prix last year to compete in the Indy 500 to grab what would have been one of 3 prestige wins required to win the legendary Triple Crown. The Monaco Grand Prix, the Indy 500 and the Le Mans 24 Hours.
He'd already bagged the first when he won in Monaco in 2006, so in 2017 he decided to abandon his unreliable Honda F1 car and instead hop into an unreliable Honda Indy car. He was extremely competitive, but the car broke down before he made it to the line. In January he tried his hand at the Daytona 24 Hours, driving an unreliable Ligier whose brakes failed, at 300 km an hour. At night.
Not at all taking a hint from the motor racing gods, Alonso decided to take the extreme path of least resistance by signing up to the WEC Super Season and joining the Toyota Works team, a team that literally has no competition.
Some might say he'd earned a bit of an easy ride after the hardships of the last 12 years, involving joining a team that cheated and lost all its points, then returning to a team that then cheated and lost its management, then joining a team on the downswing only to then leave them as they hit an upswing in order to return to that first team just as it hit absolute rock bottom.
I'm pretty sure the only reason he stayed at McLaren so long is the woman down the job centre said it wouldn't look good on his CV if it looked like he was moving around too much.
Alonso's team have had incredible success this season in WEC, as you'd expect. Even when he was disqualified at Silverstone, it was still a win that got binned.
He's well on his way to winning the title with Toyota, and he's already bagged 2 of the 3 wins required to win the Triple Crown.
This leaves a return to the Indy 500 and inevitability. But why stop at 3 crowns when he could barge his way Thanos-like across the motorsports universe, taking prestige victory after prestige victory to feed the gaping void inside that can never be filled?
And there's currently only one driver chasing Alonso down for those legendary crowns, and that Juan Pablo Montoya. All right. Anyway, I don't think the The circus arrived in Mexico with Hamilton having both hands, both feet, and the tip of his little Lewis on the championship trophy.
He only had to score 5 points from the last 3 races to claim the title, leaving Vettel with very little margin for victory. Everyone was expecting the driver's title race to end here. And so it did.
But Hamilton didn't take it with a bang. In fact, his race, like the cure for smallpox, was a little off the boil.
The thin atmosphere shifted the balance of power fully towards the Red Bulls, with the Austrian team taking a 1-2 with Ricciardo on pole. Daniel was so happy with grabbing P1 in qualifying that he apparently upset Max Verstappen. And you don't want to upset Max Verstappen. But points only come on race day, and Max snatched the lead immediately after Ricciardo bogged down off the line and, after a great fight through the race, ended up retiring. For the 8th time. This year.
Hamilton and Vettel got to have their on-track scrap, and though ultimately Vettel easily pushed past the Mercedes driver, it was all as fruitless as diet lilt, as Hamilton claimed the title at a canter from 4th place.
This gave Hamilton a 5th title and moved him into a bracket shared only by Fangio and Schumacher. No, not that Schumacher. No, not Joel Schumacher, maker of Batman and Robin. Michael Schumacher. God.
Meanwhile, while everyone was watching the championship fight come to an end and Max take a glorious win, Alonso retired and Williams were just there, I guess, down the back of the field somewhere. You know, where you'd expect McLaren and Williams to be. You know, when I started watching Formula One, McLaren, Williams and Ferrari were the absolute powerhouse trio of the sport.
But while Ferrari have had a fairly steady run of being
there or thereabouts in the last 20 years, Williams have scraped the bottom of the lake all too often, and McLaren, for all its power and riches, have nosedived like a clowning Dumbo in recent years. And now neither of them have won the Constructors' title in 2 decades, and they just spent the last season flopping about like wet bread. McLaren have suffered from their partnership with a struggling Honda engine in the hybrid era. Not only was the engine pretty ghastly, but it also masked what turned out to be a serious bit of wandering off course with their chassis design. They've had 3 different engine manufacturers in the hybrid era and failed to astonish or astound with any of them, scoring just 2 podiums and 0 wins. McLaren pride themselves on being at the cutting edge of racing technology, but have yet to use their enviable resources and ingenuity to pull themselves out of the mud. You know, I spoke to a handsome chap named Fredo, and he said there were some serious problems with McLaren's management team, though I think it'll be a few years before we get the full picture of what happened during McLaren's darkest years. I mean, Ron Dennis will be rolling in his grave. I mean, he's still alive, but he's so upset that he went out, dug a grave, just to be able to get in it and roll around in it. That's how bad things have got. Williams, on the other hand, flourished with the advent of the hybrid era. They used their super strong Mercedes power units to great effect at first, coming 3rd overall in 2014 and 2015 after years of languishing about in the lower midfield. But then they dropped to 5th, and now they finished 2018 dead last behind all 9 teams, one of which was only allowed points from less than half the races. Not great for the 9 times champions. Williams didn't help themselves by running only young, rookie-ish drivers, though Claire Williams was adamant they were more than drive-for-pay pilots and were strong in their own right, and Nigel Mansell was sure their inexperience wouldn't be a problem, saying, "A Formula 1 car, until it's handed over to the driver at a certain speed, drives itself now." So I guess the question is, why didn't it drive itself faster then? Williams are an engineering team and don't have the mighty resources to throw at every problem. Tight of wallet and old of fashion, they can use their cunning to take advantage of big rule changes, but then aren't able to keep up with the ferocious rate of development seen further up the pit lane. So perhaps Williams need to modernise and go big, or go the way of the other old school teams like Tyrrell, Lotus and Arrows and the like. Though I guess Tyrrell have now morphed into the current Mercedes team, and I've heard they're doing alright. A stronger midfield has made it even more difficult for the old stalwarts to fight their way back to the top. Their predicament should strike fear into the Red Bulls and Mercedeses of this world. Anyone can fall, and no one is going to pick you back up again. I for one do hope Williams and McLaren can fight their way back to the top, but if not, it's always nice to see smaller teams' trophy cabinets get heavier. McLaren and Williams obviously weren't going to turn things around in the last 2 races, and with both titles already wrapped up, you'd be forgiven for thinking there'd be nothing to write home about. But you would be wrong. Brazil was just Brazil. Just 100% Brazil. Just absolutely no chill. Quali was bonkers, with a dozy Hamilton getting in both Kimi and Sirotkin's way, the latter having to swerve onto the grass to dodge a very nasty accident. There were no penalties for Lewis, but there were a lot of angry pointy fingers at his clumsy carelessness, to put it mildly. Was this a classic post-championship Lewis sleepwalk? No one in power seemed to care, to be honest. The slightly rainy but not quite rainy enough session had everyone a little bit stir-crazy, including Vettel, who, in a hurry to get through the weighbridge procedure, nearly ran down a scrutineer and broke the weighing scales, earning himself a fine. Clearly there's just something in the water in Brazil that makes people make terrible decisions. Now Verstappen started the race in P5, talking down any hope of fighting for anything close to victory. But, to much surprise, he ended up with some serious race pace and, maybe more importantly, some incredible tyre management. Vettel fell back through the field with issues, while Max only ascended, taking the lead and confidently holding it at arm's length from a struggling Hamilton. But then Esteban Ocon went to unlap himself, perhaps a little too aggressively, and Verstappen closed the door on him. They were both catapulted into a spin, and Verstappen lost the lead and the win. He was angry. Very angry, as these exclusive scenes from the Brazilian paddock show.
And then at last we came to Abu Dhabi. Normally it's a bit of a stale affair, and as expected there weren't too many big surprises. Though I guess Hulkenberg might say otherwise. In fact, the race turned out to be a bit of a microcosm, a slice, a synecdoche of the season as a whole. Teams playing about with race strategies and stretching the rubber beyond its expected life, Vettel making a strong challenge for the win, but falling short. Alonso fighting for no rewards and eventually just cutting out parts of the track for giggles. Bottas looking like he had plenty of potential, but ending up 5th after a saggy middle. And in the end, Lewis winning.
But more than anything, this was a race of goodbyes, with Alonso, Ocon, Sirotkin, Van Dorn, Hartley and Ericsson all racing in their last F1 races. Most of them for good.
Raikkonen and Ricciardo said goodbye to their long-term teams to take on a fresh challenge in neighbouring garages. In fact, only 8 drivers were set to stay put for 2019.
Despite all this, for the first time ever, the drivers that raced in Abu Dhabi also raced in every single race of the year. No swaps, no substitutes, no dropouts, and every one of them scored points. A marvel in such a chaotic year.
The biggest goodbye was of course for Fernando Alonso, who was flanked either side by fellow champions Vettel and Hamilton through the cool-down lap. The trio performed a salute of donuts for the crowd before Alonso parked up his Mclaren and walked away from it for the last time. 2018 was over. The page was turning and the ink drying on this chapter in history.
There's so much more to talk about in 2019, but look at the time. We're past the hour. You're still here for some reason, so we're just going to whiz through some stories we didn't have time for in the main bulk of the video. Starting with,
Ricciardo retired 8 times. His car broke so often and he got so many technical penalties that the failures literally broke him as a human being. He got to the point where he was just screaming out loud in the pit lane and punching holes in his motorhome instead of smiling like a piano and drinking out of footwear as is normal.
Smiley Dan was dead. All that remained was the vicious honey badger within.
Grosjean, our favourite misunderstood Frenchman, had a weird 2018. Even though Haas were in fighting form, Romain took 9 whole races to score a point. His dry run included crashing into a wall all by himself under safety car conditions, while insisting Ericsson had crashed into him. Ericsson, it turned out, was nowhere to be seen.
It is a bit worrying when people start seeing Swedes where there are none. In fact, some might say it's a real turnip for...
Also, Red Bull and Renault had a massive public falling out.
Oh, it was all a bit embarrassing, like when a couple starts arguing in the middle of a party. And Verstappen started calling Renault out on the radio with some very precise language.
You cold-blooded bastard. I'll tell you what I think of it. I live to see you eat that contract. But I hope you leave enough room for my fist, because I'm going to ram it into your stomach and break your goddamn spine! Ah!
Oh, Charles Leclerc. Like Monaco, he's rich, one of a kind, and all F1 could talk about.
Unlike Monaco, he's fast, exciting, and doesn't judge you for driving a Skoda. Also, Pirelli made a big fuss about their rainbow of tyres being both fun and giving them the scope to match every race to competitive compounds. But consensus seems to be that the rainbow is confusing, and the compound range ended up being both too robust and too sensitive, which is, well, that was tricky to do.
So Pirelli are going back to the drawing board and rethinking their compound chemistry for next year. Something wrong with this rubber. Well, that's about it for 2018, but we have got lots to look forward to in 2019. There's Alonso and McLaren taking on the Indy 500 again. There's Renault's Renaissance, Vettel's Vengeance, simplified aerodynamics, Red Bull Honda dominating the field. Or at least, so they keep telling us. And we've just got a little bit of time left to look at all the good F1 memes from this year. Well, okay then, that seems to be it. Have a great winter break. Goodbye.